Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 133, Farewell. Nephi's held the shimmering crystals, looking at them with a heavy expression. Sunny was also staring at the shards, his head full of dark thoughts. The remnants of shattered souls glowed softly in the dim twilight of dusk. Around them, the inhabitants of the outer settlement were hurrying to get inside their pitiful hovels before the coming of night. The sun was already hidden behind the cyclopean silhouette of the crimson spire, drowning the world in its eerie shadow. The air was full of fear and worry. He grimaced. "What are you thinking about?" Changing Star sighed and looked up. Her ivory face was harsh and thoughtful. She remained silent for a while, and then said in her usual calm tone, "We need to split up." Sunny couldn't help but laugh. "You do know what usually happens when people split up in these kinds of situations, right?" She stared at him with no humor in her cold, gray eyes. "This is not a drama, Sunny. We have the means to provide two of us with food and shelter for a week. There's no reason to pass on this opportunity." Cassie turned to her, a confused expression on her face. But what about the third?" An uncomfortable silence hung between them, broken only by the whistling wind. Sunny looked at the blind girl, then at Nephi's, and finally glanced at himself. Which one of them was going to remain hungry in the bitter cold while the other two would be eating their fill in the comfortable safety of the castle? He thought that he had an inkling. What else did I expect? It was less than 10 minutes since they reached the human civilization, well, whatever passed for one in this loathsome purgatory, and the tentative connection that had been established between them in the crucible of the labyrinth was already coming apart at the seams. Just as he had expected, the nature of their relationship was going to change now that they weren't essentially the last three people in the whole wide world, with no one else to rely on but each other. Was it strong enough to endure without that desperate need? He wasn't sure. Throughout his whole life, Sunny had never managed to last long in any group. He didn't know if this time was going to be any different. Just as his insecurity threatened to break out of control, Nephi sighed and handed him the soul shards. "Here. Take Cassie inside." He stared at her hand, then looked up sharply. A strange storm of emotions erupted in his heart. There was surprise, joy, concern. But at the same time, irrationally, a dark sense of shame and resentment. Not knowing how to deal with all these feelings, he scowled and asked, "Why me?" Changing Star simply raised an eyebrow. Shaking his head, Sunny offered her a crooked smile and added, "Don't get me wrong, I'm not refusing. I'm just curious, why are you so kind all of a sudden? Is it out of some misguided sense of nobility?" Nephi's looked at him for a while, and then said with indifference, "I have never been noble. I have never been kind." He blinked, struggling with the desire to pinch Neph and make sure that she was awake. Had she met herself? If she wasn't noble, then who was? Meanwhile, Changing Star shrugged and looked away. "It is simply the best choice. Right now, we need information the most. With the help of the shadow, you will be able to learn much more about what is going on in the castle than I ever would. While you are gathering information inside, I will do the same here. We will meet in a week, share our findings, and decide what to do next." Sunny just stared at her. Did Neph just reveal herself to be as cynically pragmatical as he was? Once again, he felt a weird mix of emotions. He was simultaneously elated and hurt by her lack of sentiment. However, the fact that she simply assumed that they were going to continue working together, as though it was a given, had not avoided his attention. For some reason, this small detail gave Sunny a warm feeling. Nephi's looked at him and added, "Besides, the terms of our trade have come to an end. Your promise was to give up on your share of spoils on the way to the castle. Well, here we are. That stone creature was your kill, so these shards are yours by right." "Trade? What trade?" "Oh, yeah. The trade he had made with Changing Star to get her to teach him swordsmanship and hide the fact that he had no way to absorb soul shards. He has almost forgotten about it." But she didn't. Now that Sunny had been reminded of its existence and realized that it was over, he felt a sudden pang of regret. It was as though one of the few strings that connected them together had been suddenly severed. With a sigh, he took the soul shards from her hand and gripped them tightly. "All right. Then. I'll meet you in a week, I guess." Sonny opened his mouth, wishing to say something else, but then just turned away. Stepping aside, he gave the girls some privacy to say their goodbyes. Soon, Cassie's delicate hand found his shoulder. Sonny glanced at the blind girl, remained silent for a bit, and then asked, "Are you ready?" She hesitated before answering. When she did, there was a hint of sadness in her voice. "Yes." With that, they walked away and left Nephi's behind, standing alone in the surging darkness of the descending night. Guiding the blind girl, Sonny approached the grand stairs that led to the ornate gates of the magnificent marble castle. Out here, there was nothing but the howling of the wind and the encroaching veil of darkness. It seemed as though the dwellers of the slum were not allowed to build their hovels on the wide stretch of stone that separated the marble steps from the outer settlement. "Be careful, there are steps ahead." After warning Cassie, he sensed a cold feeling grasp his heart. For some reason, it felt as though once he stepped on these stairs, there would be no way back. Gritting his teeth, Sonny took a step forward and began his ascent to the castle. Soon, they approached the apex and stopped in front of a couple of unfriendly guards. Both of the young men barring their way wore armor-type memories and wielded their weapons in the open, as though trying to warn anyone approaching to not test their patience. They looked at Sonny without even trying to hide their disdain. "What do you want, rat?" Sonny hesitated, then held out the soul shards. One of the guards glanced at them and grinned. "Well, would you look at that? The rat has brought us a present." Chuckling, he took the glimmering crystals and waved a hand. "Come on in. Someone will meet you inside." Struggling to not glare at the armed sleepers with murder in his eyes, Sonny forced out a pale smile and cautiously walked past them. Then, looking up at the dozens of human skulls swinging above them on rusty chains, he sighed darkly and led Cassie through the gates of the castle. Chapter 134, Bright Castle. As they passed through the ornate gates, a large hall opened up before them. Hearing a strange rustle from above, Sonny raised his head and saw tall windows with stained glass panes soaring to the distant ceiling. During the day, the hall must have been filled with cascading rays of beautiful light. Currently, though, several young women were nimbly moving from one window to another, draping them with thick sheets of crude fabric. The makeshift wooden ladders they used creaked and cracked, creating a strange and almost melodic sound. It seemed as though the sheets of fabric were being fastened in a way that prevented even the smallest glint of light from escaping the castle during the night. Sonny suspected that every window in the marble fortress was currently being covered in the same way. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, a loud noise thundered behind their backs. Turning around, he saw the ornate gates closing. The two guards who had met them outside were already sliding a heavy iron bolt into the sockets, their faces red from strain. The massive bar must have weighed more than the two of them combined. The castle was now sealed from the outside world, ready to face the onslaught of cursed darkness. Suddenly, Sonny felt like an animal caught in a cage. Trying to calm himself down, he looked around and noticed an opulent wooden desk that looked completely out of place in the grand hall. It must have been dragged here from some other part of the marble citadel. Behind the desk, a gaunt young man with nervous eyes was writing something down on a piece of parchment. The whole thing looked strangely similar to a reception desk in a luxurious hotel. Or, rather, to what Sonny imagined such a thing would look like. He had never actually been to a hotel, of course. Hesitating for a few moments, he walked over to the desk and addressed the young man. "Hey. We've been told that someone will meet us inside." The castle receptionist flinched and looked up from his paper, a fearful expression appearing on his face. When he realized who was speaking to him, though, the fear disappeared, replaced by a tentative smile. The young man had a thin face and a pale, unhealthy complexion. He looked hungry and weak, much more like those poor souls in the outer settlement than someone who lived in the castle. His clothes, however, were clean and tidy, without any signs of wear and tear like that of the people outside. "Ah, guests. Sorry, you gave me a fright there. Welcome to the Bright Castle. Whoa, you were just in time." A couple of minutes later, and the gates would have been closed. Saying that, he threw a tense glance at the two guards and then quickly looked away. "Anyway, my name is Harper. I'm responsible for guest accommodations today. Let's get you." "Oh. I don't seem to recognize you guys. Is this your first time paying the tribute?" Sonny stared at him for a couple of seconds, feeling Cassie squeeze his shoulder a little tighter, then said, "Yes." Harper smiled. Congratulations. You might not even suspect it, but I was once in your shoes myself. In fact, it was just a few months ago. But ever since Lord Gunlog graced me with his kindness, I've been living in the safety of the castle. You'll love it here too, I'm sure. Right. Sonny didn't know if the young man was sincere in his gratitude to the local tyrant or was simply saying these things for the guards to hear, and honestly, he didn't care. What piqued his interest, though, was that Harper did not seem as surprised by the timing of their arrival into the Dark City as Effie had been. But then he realized that people living in the castle might not have known who came to the outer settlement and when. They would probably assume that he and Cassie had entered the dream realm close to the ruins and then spent the last 2 months scrounging for soul shards to pay their way into the castle. This was a good detail to know, since Sonny didn't want to announce the true extent of their competence just yet. Judging by how impressed Effie was by the fact that they had managed to carve their way through the labyrinth, this would attract a lot of unnecessary attention. He smiled with the corner of his mouth. So, what do we need to do now? Harper picked up his quill and opened a large ledger. That's very simple, really. I'll just need your names to mark when the two of you paid the tribute, and that's pretty much it. We have a lot of spare rooms here, especially in the Tower of Dusk. It is very quiet, so how about I settle you there? There was a nervous glint in his eyes. Tower of Dusk. Probably means that it's in the western part of the castle, facing the Crimson Spire. No wonder people don't want to live there. But to Sonny, fewer people meant less danger. He gave the gaunt young man a nod. Sure. No problem. Harper smiled. Great. That's great. So your names. Sonny interrupted him, trying to avoid dangerous questions. I'm Sunless, and this is Kasha. The young man wrote their names down and marked the date of their arrival. Sonny stared at his neat handwriting, his eyes locked on the short strings of numbers. So. It had actually been exactly 77 days since the night they had arrived on the Forgotten Shore. The three of them had scrupulously kept track of time for a while, but after their harrowing experience with the Soul Devourer, Sonny had lost the grasp on the actual count. Out there in the real world, the spring was already starting. A whole season had passed. It felt like a lifetime. Not paying any attention to the storm raging inside Sonny's heart, Harper closed the ledger and offered them a polite smile. All done. Now, leave your worries behind and follow me. Between these walls, you are completely safe. Nothing is going to hurt you. His tone was jovial, but Sonny didn't miss the quick glance Harper threw at the menacing guards standing silently by the sealed gate. Chapter 135, Cohabitation. Harper led them through the castle, explaining small details about the rules and customs one had to follow once inside. He was a talkative and friendly guy, so Sonny quickly got the gist of it. In general, it was very simple. They were free to do whatever they wanted unless it broke the basic rules of cohabitation, with a few small caveats. There were areas in the Marble Fortress open to everyone, and areas that only members of Gunlog's host could enter. Those were marked by the symbol of a serpent coiled around a tall tower. As they walked, Sonny noticed several crude tapestries with that symbol woven on them. The cloth of the tapestries was black, with a stylized white tower and a golden serpent embroidered in their center. He guessed that this represented the Dark City, the Bright Castle, and its lord respectively. Apart from that, there wasn't much to know except for when and where to find food, water, and other necessities. The last thing Harper said was about how they should behave around other inhabitants of the fortress. People here are very nice, but you still must remember to have manners. Especially when you are interacting with the guards and the hunters. These guys protect us and risk their lives to provide for us, so they deserve our respect. If one of them. If there's a misunderstanding, be mindful of their burdens. Yes. Sonny threw a dark glance at the gaunt young men and translated that statement to "Don't mess with Gunlog's people, and if they are messing with you, just swallow it." How wonderful. Meanwhile, he was able to catch a few glimpses of how people actually lived inside the castle. To Sonny's surprise, they didn't seem nearly as put down and miserable as he had expected. In fact, everyone seemed to be more or less fine, going about their business with mundane casualness. Of course, there were signs of worry, stress, and pressure on their faces, but the same could be said about people in the real world. All in all, the inhabitants of the castle looked surprisingly ordinary. I guess humans can adapt to anything. And as Changing Star had taught him, adaptability was the greatest strength. As long as there was some semblance of stability, humans would find a way. And it seemed as though the tyrannical master of the ancient fortress, hateful as he was providing the sleepers trapped on the forgotten shore with that stability. Effie's words about how the bastard was the only thing holding this place together echoed in Sunny's mind. Perhaps he's a necessary evil. Finally, they reached the westernmost tower of the castle. Indeed, it was mostly empty and quiet. Few people seemed to want to stay here, driven away by the unnerving vision of the crimson spire looming in the distance. However, for the two of them, it was perfect. Cassie couldn't see it all, while Sunny was long accustomed to the presence of the spire because of his sensitivity to shadows. Plus, right now, all the windows in the tower were closed, hiding it from sight. Harper suddenly stopped and said in a somewhat embarrassed tone, I forgot to ask. Would you guys be needing one room or two? Without thinking too much, Sunny and Cassie answered at the same time, 1. 2. Then, they froze and turned to each other with petrified expressions. Cassie blushed, while Sunny became even paler. He didn't mean anything untoward by requesting a single room for the two of them. It's just that over the month spent camping together, being close to Cassie in case she needed help with something had become his habit. More importantly, he was unwilling to let her leave his sight even for a second in this unpredictable castle. He didn't trust anyone here. But in these new circumstances, requesting a single room suggested a different meaning. But there wasn't. Clearing his throat, Sunny looked at Harper and said, 2 rooms if they're next to each other. That is not possible, then 1. The skittish young man scratched the back of his head, and then answered in a somewhat surprised tone, all right. I think I can find 2 adjacent rooms for you. Follow me. With that, he began walking forward. Sunny glanced at Cassie, then shook his head and followed behind Harper. She won't misunderstand. Right. Soon, they were standing in front of 2 sturdy wooden doors. Harper handed Sunny 2 iron keys and smiled. Here we are. The rooms are not very big, but they're really cozy. Enjoy your first night of safety, guys. You must have not felt safe in a long time. I know I never did before entering the castle. Thank heavens that time is behind me. Anyway, food will be served 1 hour after sunrise tomorrow, in the main hall of the keep. See you there. With that, he glanced at them one last time, smiled sheepishly, and walked away. Sunny and Cassie were left alone in awkward silence. Still feeling a little embarrassed, Sunny sighed and said, I hope you didn't think that I was. Cassie suddenly giggled. I know. I just didn't expect it. Let me guess, you distrust every single person in this castle, and therefore are going to watch me like a hawk to scare them all away. Like an overprotective, mean, violent big brother. Right. With a smile, she turned her head this way and another, and then added, to be honest, I don't feel safe here either. So, thank you. Although I must say, this place seems almost like a hotel. My parents took me on a mountain vacation once, and we stayed at a really old hotel. What was it called? Overgaze. Overlook. Anyway, this place is exactly like that. Sunny grinned. Right. I've never been to a hotel, but that was my first thought as well. Of course, that was if the hotel in question was populated by hundreds of nightmare spell carriers, with a murderous tyrant for an owner, and not a single police officer around to call for help if something happened. Funny. Sunny had spent most of his life scared of the policemen and trying to avoid them at all costs. But now, he actually missed them a lot.